Well, welcome everybody. We're glad you're here.
My younger sister as well.
Love to hear a little bit of a favorite place in Montana. So think of one of your favorite places in Montana. And we'll go around the circle if you don't mind telling us your name and one of your favorite places. So I'm Shann, Ray, and there are so many favorite places in Montana. This time I'm going to choose Pine Creek in Paradise Valley and Pine Creek Falls, where I faked it with Jen, and she thought I was going to ask her to marry me there. But instead I asked her down on Westward Beach in California. So Pine Creek's a gorgeous hike off the Yellowstone City. Yeah. And Pine Creek Falls especially. We sat up on top of the falls, and then it had a huge lightning storm in that tiny little canyon. And it ran down after that. It was fun. And maybe we'll go towards Jen.
Sure. I'll pick that picture right there, that gorgeous picture is in our kitchen, and that is one of my favorite spots in Montana. That's right outside of Livingston, where my love of my life grew up.
Thank you. So. And Pine Creek's kind of, if you go right in the middle, back in those mountains. Yeah, not too far. Maybe towards Jody.
I don't know what you're gonna say.
Well, you say.
Prediction.
It won't be like ordering dinner.
I think
I love it.
the far end of Lindbergh Lake.
Okay.
Good choice.
Because you can go. There's a trail down to Crystal Lake, which we have yet to take successfully because we always see bears there.
Oh yeah. That's great. Great story.
But it's a nice paddle down to there. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, I think I like walking on the Beartooth Plateau. I think that is one of my favorite places.
Hard to beat that. That's awesome.
I'll say Blodgett Canyon for now. That's a good choice.
So tell me where that's at.
It's south of here, just barely west of Hamilton.
Okay. Nice.
Great cliff faces, nice trail up through it, nice creek to put your feet in when you get back.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm a pretty big fan of Bison Range.
Yeah.
It's good choice.
What's that little? Is that Moise or something?
Yeah, Moise.
Is that how do you pronounce it? I never did.
Moise, right?
Moise, yeah. That's great. Nice.
I live a few miles west of Kalispell, and I have an orchard of antique apple varieties. And it's up on a point, and I just like sitting in the middle of the orchard and looking at the valley and the apples. I like my own
That's
place.
great. Wow. Are the missions kind of in sight, the mission range?
The very north part of the
Yeah.
missions. It's more the swamps.
Okay, yeah, nice. That's good.
I like St. Ignatius. I
Yeah.
like the history of the nuns having come there and before they came here, and tracks of relatives that have been missing off the family tree for decades. Tracked them, they came here, got married by Reverend McLean, and then had a dairy farm up kind of where the Buffalo Reserve is now.
Wow.
So
That's great.
they're buried up there.
That's amazing.
Found them.
Great story.
I love the Beartooth. I went hiking there this summer. I have a friend that knows the area really well, so I don't really know exactly where we went. But
Yeah.
I thought it was so spectacular, and the way, I've only lived in Montana a few years, but just the way the prairies then go to the mountains. It's
Yeah,
just-
it's so good. Thank you.
My name's Bridget, and I think I've got two places. First, Glacier National Park doing the Pitamack and Dawson Loop.
Nice.
And then I'm from Billings, so I grew up on the flats, and I do have lots of fond memories going north of Billings in Bellstone area and hunting with my dad. It was like the rolling hills, so.
Yeah, was it antelope or deer?
Deer mostly.
My cousins were from Milestone.
Oh.
That's good.
Probably gonna get it.
Yeah.
My name is Mike. I'll go with Scapegoat Mountain, Scapegoat Wilderness. Part of it is this huge plateau, and when you're out there, you can see the Rockies all crumpled up right next to the plains, but you have to earn it. It's there.
Yeah, that's great. And Mike's got a nice book and presenting here this weekend, right?
Yeah, I'll be on a panel, wildlife panel on Sunday.
Nice. What's it called? What's the book?
Wilted Wings, Hunters Fight for Eagles.
Nice. Wilted Wings. Thank you.
I'm Peggy, and I would say the backwoods behind my house where I've walked every day for 35 years.
Great.
Heron Rookery back there.
Yeah. Is that right here?
It's west of town.
Yeah. That's it. Well, you kind of covered
my-
most of the state
yes,
yourself.
My name is Craig, by the way. Thank you all for coming. I pulled up this one. This is the first thing that came to mind as far as this time of year. This is a two-part piece that this is in the Smith River area, and this is on the Tenderfoot, which is a tributary that flows in. We hiked in. I believe it was 12 miles or so to access the Smith from this area. It was a newly opened area that was bought through Fish Wildlife Parks, the Forest Service that kind of put it together, bought their ranch and pieced it together, so it's open to the public now. And it is just a magical spot of, I think there were 30-some river crossings to get, so, you're crossing the Tenderfoot the whole way. And then you get there and you're on the Smith, and then of course you're in the cliff areas. And this time of year, it is even though it's been many years since I've done this, the Smith is quite busy now, as a lot of popular areas are. And don't tell anybody, but you can still go in the fall without a permit in low water and kayaking or canoe. You're dragging a little bit because there's not that much water there, but last time I went, we saw a total of 0 people.
Wow.
And we did get out of our canoes and drag over, quite a few banks, but we had the place to ourselves, and it was just spectacular. And stop and hike, and this is a shot from this area where there are a bunch of old Douglas fir, and there's this old cairn here on the right side. Just kind of sat by this tree and watched this big bend for a while. Finally, a raft came in around the corner, and I was able to get the shot. Like, perfect. I needed a little bit sense of scale. To be able to see what it was. I'd say that's probably my favorite place this time of year.
Wow.
Then I also will transition out into the eastern part of Montana, more so, especially now that my boys are interested. I'd like to go out. It's an excuse to go to ranches in places that I would never get an excuse to go, and that's bird hunting, and I have a little dog, and we'll just go walk 20 miles, and usually, rarely even shoot, but the camera's with me, and you just get views and angles of places that you would otherwise never get to. Monstrous ranches that you have access to as a hunter, or you just buy a license and go. I mean, if you don't want, the block management program is a magic thing for people, even if you don't hunt it. Really get out there.
Wow. That's great. Thank you. So thanks for coming today. And Craig and I are talking about Montana Panoramic, transparent in the backlight, and a project that, in many ways was 15 or 16, 17 years old because of when we first met through Jennifer, my wife, who, when I was writing different books of short stories or novel or poems, I would always have, because I was born and raised in Montana and consider Montana, such a home, such a strength and a place of peace for me. I always had the, photos of Montana laid out on the writing desk. And so anyway, she found one of Craig's books and wrote him and said, hey, can you write a little something to my husband on this book. So then it was, we didn't know each other, but then it was his book open all the time, his previous book. And, when you're writing something in the Beartooth Range or, Continental Divide around Butte, or, just look at some of his photos and pick up some of the specifics a little more. Having spent time in a lot of those places too, you have your physical recollection, but, the photographs are always so very helpful about, everything in there. So, in any case, that's how it all started. And then some years later, I told it this morning, but I asked him if I could, we could do a little artist agreement and use his photographs on my website. So if you look at that website, each of the headings of each page, I don't know, maybe that site has 25 pages or so, but it each has, one of these gorgeous panoramic photos on the top. So I think we agreed, I would pay him $300, and then once it got up as a website, I was like, I was way too cheap. Because it was so gorgeous what he did. Welcome, good to see you. There's a chair here, there's a chair there. You want one? Yeah. Oh, there's one there too, yeah. Great, wherever you'd like. And so then I just, literally felt like I did not pay an artist enough. So I sent him a check for $500. And that started even more of a friendship. Because he said, hey, why don't you pick something out of his studio? So then I was looking online at his studio. And Jen and I literally had this place in our house for, how many years did we talk about that? Probably at least 15 years, I'd say. We need something right there. But it was a huge space, like a wall like this. And, you may not know this, but he has, these pieces that are 10 feet by 4 feet. So now it's there. It's gorgeous. Look at it every day. It reminds me of home. And it was that picture at Dupuis, which is sort of right at the head of Paradise Valley with those 3 swans in it. And, that's where I, body floated the Yellowstone in high school with my friends and almost drowned. And so the picture is happy instead of sad. But that's how it all kind of started to come together. So then you can, if you'd like, you can tell the story of like how we got together on it.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
So after that book, that was kind of a retrospective of work from '97 to 2007. Then I started basically working on this one from that time on, and here about 3-4 years ago, started doing the editing process and putting it together and figuring out the narrative of how it was going to flow was the impossible part. But I would just start banking everything together and narrowing it down to, well, it's hard to narrow down. This is the biggest thing we've done so far. There's 400 pages.
And how many photos do you think? Because there's a lot of.
I actually counted them the other day because one of the awards
needed
the exact count, and I'd forgotten. I believe it was 325 or something along that. Because there's several detail images as well. So that was narrowed down from 1,500 or so to versus also 10,000. It was a hair-raising experience or hair-losing experience, as the case might be. And I definitely have done that as well. So going through the process, I was about half to 3/4 of the way done, and I thought it just needed something else. And I couldn't quite place what it was exactly. I'd kind of gone back and forth on a few ideas, and I just thought, well, at least I would love to get Shann to write the foreword for it, and asked him to do that, and he did. And even at that time, I didn't have a title for the book either. Yeah. And there was a stanza in there that was perfect. Maybe you'll read a portion of that here in a bit. Transparent in the backlight. It just seemed to make sense with everything that was going together there. And so that piece together, more and more editing and more time went together. I'd ask one more, like, would it be possible that you could maybe add a couple, anything that you would want to add, a short story, a poem here and there. And so basically that started the process, and then that process went on for a couple of years, back and forth in editing and finding the right piece with the right photo, or in some cases where you would just write some for the photo, and then a couple short stories here and there, and then it finally came together.
And that went back and forth too, in that there were pieces that, I would not have, having written for a lot of years, I had a lot of pieces that were in books of poems or in a short story or in a novel or something, sections that could be made into poems, a lot of different things there, and you're just sort of looking through all these photos, trying to not directly match them, but, do something with it. I was mentioning it this morning, but so I started to envision it as something like a human family moving through landscape. So women and men, being shaped by landscape, and skyscape and night sky, and all kinds of, all the things that are in here. And so it ended up, maybe it's about every 2 or 3 or 4 pages there's a poem set to, a photo, and then there's 3 separate, more narrative parts to it. And so we were just back and forth kind of looking at those. And then I know you went out after reading some things like the Nez Perce story, Nez Perce reconciliation story, just briefly. The Nez Perce generally yearly will invite the descendants of those who massacred the Nez Perce, so the descendants of the Calvary, families that did the massacring long ago, to meet with the survivors' descendants. in a reconciliation ceremony over here on the Big Hole where the massacre was, which is very close. And they'll walk through the dawn carrying lanterns, and then they'll sit in a reconciliation peace and forgiveness circle, with the men sort of on the inner circle and the women surrounding the outer circle. And that I came to that knowledge being a forgiveness and genocide researcher all these 25 years at Gonzaga University, and kind of going all over to genocide sites around the world. My own family is Czech and German, so the sites like Lidice where the Germans, genocided the Czechs in World War II. All of this was very close to me, but of course Montana has many sites like that, and the creativity and I would say the imaginative force of, a loving imagination that would come from the Nez Perce, the Cheyenne, the Crow, or the Blackfeet, and how that would envision something that you don't normally see in American society, right? So anyway, that was one where, I'd written about Robbie Paul, who she studied with me. I was her chair for her dissertation, and her work was just, so stellar. 5 generations of Nez Perce families, leadership from the beginning of White Contact up to now, on through Chief Joseph up to now. And it kind of ends, her dissertation ends with this reconciliation ceremony, and her and her father taking part in that. And of course, as you know, Native Nations culture is often very funny. I lived on the Shann reservation for quite a while, and had a lot of contact on the Crow and Blackfeet reservations. But in any case, one of the parts of that story is she took her dad this first year to go through this thing, this ceremony. And he kind of stayed back. He didn't really get into it. Later in the hotel room, she's feeling terrible, like maybe she traumatized him. She's like, "Why didn't you take part?" Because there's a passing of the pipe and different things. He's like, "Well, I just felt like there was germs." This is pre-pandemic, but he's like, I'll do it next year. So anyway, they did do it next year. But anyway, I always think that's kind of humorous that real life intersects with everything, on these things. But and then you, on that one, you went back and
I did.
Maybe you can show them some of those images too.
Yeah, certainly. That was one where, after Shann had given that story and I read through it, I realized that what I had for the Big Hole just wasn't quite good enough for the story that he was saying. And so I wanted to go back and kind of reshoot some of that area to kind of convey a little bit more. In fact, one of them is a bit of an illustration where I did some double exposures over, and this is another one of them from Blackfeet where...
Can you read what it says? I like the graffiti, I think. Is
important. I agree. So it was one of the things I found stark. This was a monument to, let's see if I can zoom in here.
There we go. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, isn't that great? Pekuni, Blackfeet land.
This was over a monument to basically the white man, the war that had happened there, and some of the massacres. So this was in Browning, and this was another one that I had gone back to shoot. I just felt like I didn't.
We were talking about in Montana how Montana is such a important essence of American life too, right? We have everything here. So you think about that monument to basically the white dominant culture at that time,
right?
And then you see that graffiti.
So this was the Camp Disappointment spot, which I find interesting. There is a lot of change, and so most of these signs, when you go out and read them, are just signs about Lewis and Clark, or Lewis and Clark and what happened here, and then no other story. And so you do find, I am finding more and more graffiti and other different stories, which I appreciate, and I'm sure a lot of people do as well. But anyway, the idea was that I went back and shot a few of these spots to kind of mix in with Shann's words a bit more. This one I kind of shot for you as well.
We did, thank you. We did get some basketball in the snow.
Yeah, a little bit of basketball.
That's like a large defender right there.
This is all east side of Glacier. And this one was this was a couple of years ago here, after one of those 4-foot snows in the spring, and people were just completely snowed in. It just hadn't, no access to the world, which in a lot of cases they're used to. In some in some areas there, it's not needed at all.
So the big hole.
The big hole.
Yeah.
Thank you. I knew I was going somewhere with that. I got lost. Let's see. The big hole. I should know this at
I
this
know,
point.
I always have to
But
look it up, too.
I do think I have to go to 362. That should get me to that spot there. Get close. Oh wait, since we're here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So stunning.
Yeah,
For
these
you.
are so stunning. It's just a joy to see them every time.
There's Blodgett Canyon, if I recall, I don't have a pointer here. Not too far from this site. Isn't it on the
Robert was
left?
talking
Is
about-
it that left canyon outside of Hamilton? Anyway, that top shot is Hamilton there.
Yeah.
Now we're getting to the big hole here. Shann,
Yeah,
I have
what
no
page is
idea. That is 344. I wonder if we should just read a little
Yeah,
bit
let's do it.
of this section here, since we're talking about it.
So, am I close here? My
Yep.
344
No, that's
is
three.
here.
Oh, wait a second.
Might be a
I
little-
think we did do a few adjustments. You're close.
Oh, yeah.
Keep going.
Was it back or forward?
I apologize. Let's see where the next one over
This way.
here's that we were talking about.
Where
And
is
then,
that? Oh, there's that picture right there. So it might be back.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah. Okay, so do you want to go back to?
Sure.
that one?
there we go.
So, in producing we would just sort of, some are sort of subtly matched, others are not, others are somewhat directly matched. Most are not too directly matched. And then thinking of this arc of sort of beginning, middle, and end, you have, this family sort of moving through this landscape throughout the whole book. And in a way, it's novelistic, and I was thinking maybe of a lot of our families, and in my family, we have everything from my grandparents who lived in Cohagen, and my grandma was the postmaster there, which is a town of 8 people between Jordan and Mount City. And, she'd serve the surrounding, ranching community in general with, and, her place was just a house that had the, little American, flag post, American flag, and then the back of the house had the wooden mailboxes, right, where you'd come in and just get your mail. And then she had the Dutch door, which was always wide open, and most of the time it was just come on in and then through the living room into the kitchen, so people just hang out, have some pie or cinnamon rolls and water and coffee, and and then they'd go back on their way. So that was sort of that life. Carl and I were spending summers in that area, but then Dad was Circle, Montana, which is maybe 300 people, kind of a 2-lane road, as many you've seen, with a few houses off of each side of it, and pretty bare out there, the east side of the state. Then we lived, again, the Shann Reservation and Bozeman and Livingston, so we kind of got to live in a stint of 6 years in Alaska. We got to do a lot of things. So in any case, when I'd come across something like this, a lot of times it'd be landscape because we, hunted and fished a lot. So I could kind of see where I'd written something that might fit, and then sometimes they don't directly fit, but there's this story that I was trying to convey in the book when I saw Craig's work, which has something to do with, our losses, our ups and downs. In my family, we have everything from prisoners, no murderers. We have had people murdered, all kinds of ups and downs, big pushes towards faith, big pushes against faith, all kinds of messiness, all kinds of beauty. So I was trying to just capture that along the way in the story. So I'm not totally sure what this one says, but it's probably more about the land. So here we go. The vault of night was bedecked with light, a coronet of stars over fields that sparked with snow. From a high ridge they watched a golden eagle in its circuit across the sky. Claws tucked to fists, wings containing air and light. They stood in the black brightness of dawn, dark shadow over the earth, the sky almost unbearably gold. The whole of existence sang with enormity and hunger. So that just came out of a piece that was actually towards the end of a novel, American Copper, and felt like it fit.
And that was one of the things I think that you presented to me, and that we filtered through to kind of, you pulled from a lot of your different books, different books of poems. So it was a kind of a conglomeration of 15 years of your own work
Right.
combined with mine that kind of just kind of where they
Exactly.
would meet together. This is
That's great.
more timely to the time of year here as well, a little bit.
And then we get to the Nez Perce.
Yes.
And this is where you went back.
Exactly, and so this is where I went back. I had a couple shots that just didn't convey anything that I thought fit the story at all, so went back and I just wanted a bit of the lodge mixed in, and then.
And that's just set up as the memorial.
It is. This is
So-
set up as the memorial where you can go walk through, and you can really get a sense of the place, especially if you have read anything about it.
And the story's in here. You can kind of see what happens as it happens. It talks about the history, and that kind of goes exactly into the story as we know it.
Correct.
And then kind of comes out of it with Robbie Paul's story with her father. You know,
Yeah,
so-
yeah. And this was just a bit of an illustration, a kind of a double exposure there, that it just helped tell the story a little bit more, at least give a sense of place to the words. And otherwise, most everything was, more of I had it done, and Shann would then present it for what he thought would fit, and then I would go back and then, of course, have the designer put it together.
And then there would be, like, I remember in one of the along the way, different rounds, we might say, oh, maybe we want to put a few more in here, and so that there's a little more, like, for a while we maybe had a piece here, but then, of writing, and then another piece out here. So sometimes I would write directly to what he had shot.
Right.
And then, so that was also enjoyable. That's kind of like, writing poems to a piece of art, And that was part of it too. Yeah, let's do that one. I wrote this one to the image.
Did you? Okay. I was wondering on some of these.
Yeah, which one?
That's just a few pages down. You're almost there.
Still going.
One or two more. There you go.
So this, I'm definitely familiar with this. In Cohagen, we were in winter like this at times. And so, you kind of see this image, but, so this is what came in on here. So, and my grandpa would always, I don't know about anybody raised on ranches or dealt with cattle? Yeah, around the rim. So in our family, the cows were always, bossy, like, here, boss, come on, boss, and here, bossy, and you'd be kind of talking them through as you're moving, so. In a near whiteout, the cattle move slow down the road, led by the low voices of the horsemen. Get up, bossy. Up now, bossy. The whip, a snap of sound in the corridors of wind howl and hoof and snow. Yeah. So just spending a lot of time with that picture and working on poems.
At 3 in the morning.
Yes,
mostly.
I'm always 10 to 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 at night. He's the opposite side, so we'd have these exchanges where I'm releasing it to you now.
We were saying in our discussion this morning how he does the late nights, and I'm usually in the early morning for combination of get up to shoot sunrise, and I can just get a lot more done. So I would get up at 3 or 4 in the morning and work till
Right.
time to get the kids out to school or something, and so that time for me is the time where I can just sit and process, and quiet, and he does the other one, go
Yeah.
for the late night. Although sometimes in the summer, mine would be both.
Yes.
You're
getting limited sleep in the
Yeah,
summer.
well, I'm a professional napper, as some of my friends might know. In fact, this afternoon, I brought my hammock with me so I could find a park nearby, and I proceeded to.
Did you get one?
Oh, absolutely, no question, because I was up at 5 this morning. But, yeah, for chasing the light, if I have a location that I want to shoot, or an idea or a concept, it is, early morning, and the light is only there for a short amount of time, and it's either there or it's not. And so you can take as many photos as you want. They never will turn out for at least in my mind, what I want them to be. And so there's a lot of times this repetition of place that can happen, and you end up falling in love with this place a little bit, or in some cases hating the spot, which is pretty rare. But the process ends up forcing me into a meditation place in a way where I'm up in the morning and sitting and waiting and watching, and then later kind of exploring the area, finding more locations, more spots, seeing what is around. napping, and then going back out for the evening light. And so these days end up being from 4 in the morning till a lot of times, midnight or later. And so there's a very minimal part of sleep. And so it ends up being this process that's fairly addicting, at least for me, where you're out there just constantly out in a spot in a location. And specifically for areas where you're hiking in more, or people do this when they're studying, like wildlife watching, any of these things that kind of force you to get out there, and you don't realize it at the time, but it's actually forcing you to participate in a way that you would not normally do. And I find that more enjoyable than anything else in the whole process. Kind of got up on a little side tangent there.
That's great. Craig, what I've always loved too about your work is, Craig's really a master of light. You'll see when you look through the book, just how light is used. And then I teach leadership in film at Gonzaga and have for many years. You're always looking at motifs, and of course light is a major one through here. So it fit that we'd be talking about transparent in the backlight, which the term for me came from, when you're driving on these back roads in Montana, you'll often see these crosses transparent in the backlight where somebody died, and so, some of those motifs run through for me. I'm sure it wasn't conscious at all for him, but even if we just look at this photo, you have the whip coming down off of a cross-like structure that descends multiple times into the existential void, right? And I think that is quite a composition, right? If we look at the perspective and look at what's going all the way back, and then for me, when I look at that very far, cruciform structure, then you have an actual tree next to it, which is also, anyway, all this stuff fascinates me as a writer, as somebody that's kind of looking into these photos, probably looking too far in many ways. They can just be enjoyed for what they are, most of the time. But I notice that, Craig's photos are sort of always have endless ways to be inside this landscape. So I love that about them. Maybe I'll do a little bit of reading. That's another one of the things that's been neat about this is you get to a project like this, it's substantial, and so I always want to honor people, So do you remember where that Jim Harrison one is? Basically a river bend.
Oh, yes. Oh, boy.
Let me see if
Was
I
that on
can
the
find it.
Madison?
Big river, beautiful river bend that we did it.
Oh, wait, I think that one is on the Missouri.
Yeah, that's right. That's what Chris Dombrowski was saying.
Curious, has anybody in the room ever been to this spot?
I have not.
Recognize this? This is an old, that used to be a waterfall on the Missouri. Old bend on the last ice age, 12,000-ish years ago when this was all underwater. It turned and went right as opposed to heading north. And there's still remnants of the old riverbed, and this was a giant waterfall. It's a private ranch now, but they will allow you to go hike around. Or they
What's
used
it
to.
called?
It's called Lost Lake,
Yeah.
and it's called the Shonkin Sag is the name of it. It's a beautiful drive south of Great Falls. If you ever get around that was a little side note. While Shannon's
This one's, and stay there for a second too.
Yeah, sure.
This one, I think,
Yeah.
is just 3 or 4 pages, around 207. But,
Yeah, okay.
but this one was kind of fun too, and I wrote this towards the photo too. Can you make it just a little
Yeah,
bigger?
absolutely. Yep.
Because literally when I saw this, it just reminded me of my grandma, because my grandma, the postmaster we were talking about, her name was Carrie. And probably it's why I started researching forgiveness and genocide, was, that background of our Czech family, our own Czech blood being genocided by our German blood, right? So Grandma Carrie, who we called the Great One because she was just a wonderful, uniter of people, connector, her and Hergert. So Hergert, the German, married Catherine, Carrie, the Czech, in New York City during World War II, just after Czechoslovakia had been invaded by Germany. So it's such a great, story. And then they square danced together until, he died. So 50 years of square dancing, 60 years. And she even got 2 knee replacements, in her 70s to keep square dancing. So yeah, kind of a great woman. So I wrote this for her, and this just reminded me. Every Saturday night, my grandmother danced a whirlwind on the open plain, her face in unabated elation as her laughter harking thunderheads forth go back to the picture. I even called you, I think, to hey, tell me what's going on. in this
Yeah,
picture.
yeah.
So, go ahead.
The interesting part that I just happened to land on this one is this came up in this morning's discussion as well. The question was, do you have any, to Shann and I, do you have any books or stories that are your favorites, or do I have any photos that are my favorites? And for me, these are a place and time and a travel log in my mind, just like when you're traveling around, you take your photo, you have certain ones that mean something to you. And this one, the scale of this, I've printed a few of these. I sold one that was a 12-footer, and I loved it. That was the first one that I'd seen that big, and I actually felt like I was standing there, because this is one of those just magnificent, giant summer thunderstorms that everyone in here has likely seen, especially when you get off in the plains. This is great north of Great Falls. And it's so immense and so large that it was just hard to even fathom how big it was. And it's just moving through. And I had my boys with me on this trip, and we were loaded up in the truck. We're heading to Fort Benton to camp out for the night. And they were younger at the time, and one of them's crying, and this sucks, Dad, that sort of stuff. But also they're enjoying it, and this was, and I said, here's a part that I enjoy a lot. Watch this, guys. And we just pull over and we just sat there. And I said, we're just going to sit and watch the storm for the next hour. And this thing we're watching, and it's changing color, and it's changing size, and it's changing all these things. It's just like watching a movie come across the plains. And then all of a sudden, at the last minute, of waiting for the light to just be right. And I didn't think it was going to happen. And just at the last moment, you can see the rays coming across there, and it illuminated this double rainbow right in the middle of the eye of the storm. And it was just magnificent. And then to be able to capture it and remember that those are the favorite ones. But to someone else, the viewer, they would have 10 other stories about this. But the question was, specifically the memories that you have with them. And I find a lot of my clients or people that actually that buy something and put in their home, it's a big commitment to put someone's art in their home. They usually have some sort of connection with it, some sort of identification where it brings out some emotion, like you're saying, this reminds me of my mom, or this reminds me of hiking north of Billings with my dad. And so those are the connections that I really enjoy, and those end up being my favorite.
Yeah. And then go up to the riverbed.
Yeah. This is, as I'm scrolling, this is up in the breaks.
Yeah.
White Cliffs of the Missouri. And what page was that, Shann?
It's around 207.
27.
I love that one too. That one is.
The night sky there?
Yeah, and what you have there too.
Oh, yeah.
Let's remember what that is. Oh, there it is, yeah. Yeah, so I remember looking at this one too, and this comes from a book of poems called Sweet Clover, which are all love poems to Jennifer, kind of physical poems, right? Just reminded me of how many times with my dad or my brother and my family in general, but on the river at night, open to the stars, no noise but the big quiet. A lot different than when we lived in LA, isn't it, Jennifer?
Yeah.
And for me, I can still hear the sounds perfectly of this night. That's actually my camp right over here, the tent set up. And this is the Missouri, and this is up in the breaks. And I don't think there was anybody, I drove around that area for a while. There was probably nobody within at least 10 to maybe 15 square miles of me. And just all you could hear is just the silent lapping of the river cruising down and maybe a few crickets. All right, I'm sorry, you said
207. Okay. But I think it's like 3 or 4 pages before.
Okay.
Behind it.
Get there real quick. Oh, yeah, here we are. One up. I think my page is switched around a little bit from this version that I have here.
Yeah, go the other way.
I think it was one more this way. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so, those of you familiar with Jim Harrison, right? Some of us have a deep love for his book of poems, The Theory and Practice of Rivers. So just sometimes I would just put something in honor of somebody like this one. Harrison knew the theory and practice of rivers. we learned how to love by listening. So yeah, I want to make sure we leave it open for conversation too, so we're getting close to that. I'll just read, this was kind of written in honor of Doug Peacock, and it's 278. So this is, a section, kind of about the Rocky Mountain front. And I would often, come home from all these different journeys around the world to these different sites, and it's always good to come home, and Mom and Dad would be in Bozeman, right? And they would inevitably, Dad would place something from the Bozeman Chronicle in front of me, like, hey, look at what happened in the park. And it would always be somebody visiting Yellowstone National Park and getting in some encounter that usually wasn't good for their life or death, And so I wanted to write a bit of a story that reminded me of one of those, one of them that he placed in front of me. So I'll just give you sort of the beginnings of this. We won't read the whole thing. Let's see. Let me see where we get to. Okay, so his horse was near, but it was the color and brightness of the dark, manifold with stars. So this person is up in the mountains at this point at night. His horse was near, but it was the color and brightness of the dark, manifold with stars, that gave him a feeling of deepest intimacy. People bear what must be borne, Samantha had shown him as much. He wanted to be one of those. No one is alone even in the harm we endure. He wanted to be worthy of her. He'd been raised on the intimate as home, as wilderness, as woman and man, not dependence, paralysis, independence, or even liberty, but a partnering below which one lives and moves and finds being, regardless of external conditions. The grave degradations and injustices, the illnesses and mortality. That's why his grandfather's suicide shook him. It symbolized a gun set in the mouth of intimacy. The family hadn't fully regained equilibrium, even over a spate of years. His dad was as tough as these mountains, and yet when his father looked at women, John knew his father thought something somewhat like them. When most men looked at women, they imagined women thought about them. When his father looked at women, he imagined being influenced by them. A subtle but intricate element on the light continuum of which love was the fulcrum. As for himself, John couldn't handle what he knew to be the loss of love, or in his grandpa's case, self-murder. He wanted to understand it, to hold it in his hands. In his way, he'd asked his mother and father to help him understand such losses. His parents' care, something both he and Samantha needed. That kind of encompassing was beyond him, perhaps unending. So he'd come to the mountain, the moon aside behind a single cloud in the southeast. He remembered his bar fighting days in Great Falls. A man could be beaten and torn, but never know the shame a woman carried as a matter of course. More lines his mother memorized with him as a boy came to him. The night was uncommonly warm. He remained where he was. We only live, only suspire. He thought of love crafting of each person a shirt of flame. His breathing deepened and he drifted off. The night was broken once by the call of a wolf, and he woke, his upper body cold, and entered the tent and slept to sunrise. High in a tree 50 yards from camp, he'd cached the food along with the pan, plate, and utensils he'd washed in the creek. Now he walked to the creek again, knelt and washed his face and took a long draught of water. The chill of it invigorating him. He rose and eyed the horizon where a mammoth line of limestone ridges stood swept with light. Skip ahead a little bit. He cut south, descending away from the creek toward the camp again. He checked the cache and set up his fly rod before taking Charlie, that's the horse, to Battleground Lake, a mile west, where he knew the big brook trout fed on freshwater shrimp, hungry for any fly he dropped on the surface, preferably an Adam's parachute or a Roy Wolf. Cleaned the guts in a single sweep after the knife mark. Pushed the detritus down the spine with the index finger and thumb into a bouquet of clean water. Through the last stand of jack pine and some aspen, he saw Charlie swishing his tail, his ears alert and movements jittery. Strange swells of wind on the plateau, more readily picked up by a horse. Scenting not only bear, but lynx, bobcat, maybe a mountain lion. He walked to the horse and spoke kindly to him, and the animal settled some. Go ahead, he said as the horse ate. We've got a good ride ahead. He rubbed Charlie's shoulder and drew his hand down the horse's back and scratched the rump before he went to observe the cache. He felt the wind on his chest, a breeze pleasant and laced with honeysuckle and woods rose. Among a few larch and bull pine, he felt the rope and stared up into the tree where the cache bag appeared undisturbed. When he turned, he was smote by a force that leveled him to the ground and nearly knocked him senseless. The smell was all around him now. He thought it was a sow, her cubs nearby. she'd been downwind, he told himself, and called himself a fool. His face was in the dirt and bleeding, his hip out of kilter. A bear story. I always gotta have a good bear story. So let's just open it. Any thoughts or any questions? Conversation together.
I just admire you, Craig, that your pictures are just incredible works of art, and so like to have the prose or the poem on the piece, was that at all challenging for your sensibility to have that to share that space together?
It is a good question. At first, I was not sure.
Yeah.
Because like the title of our talk this morning was "The Picture Over 1,000 Words," and the idea is that the picture can and should speak for itself. But I find that in this case, I prefer having the words there as well. It acts as a map or a little direction for the viewer to just give them a little sense of both what Shann sees as a connection there and then what I see as well. So I think it just gives you a couple different things to think about, as opposed to when the viewer looks at it, you generally have your own ideas, which is what I want. But then I also want you to look through and see kind of what I was trying to convey, and then you have a third person of Shann coming in on the top, and so I like that extra conversation built into it. I think it adds to it.
I've really enjoyed it too. At first I wasn't sure, and then I was like, that's really, it heightens the experience.
Yeah, I think it makes it better.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes, please.
You know, Shann, in a conversation earlier, you mentioned you thought that having this format, it changed your words a little bit, or changed, not quite the meaning, I forget what you said. Can you elaborate on that? How did it change your prose having it with the photographs?
I just feel like prose can't quite do it, you know. Well, it's gorgeous, and you try to help it get there with what it's trying to envision by, you know, shaping and honing and then rehoning and cutting and shaping. And so for me it was such a freeing experience because, you know, it's like, yeah, this is what I was trying to mean in a way. And I love prose, I love poetry, and I love, you know, that whole work and all of the crafting and the time. I'm like a person that loves 10 and 20 or 30 year projects. So I love the patience. That said, you know, when I'd see these images, it was sort of funny because I was literally writing to images like this, but these are new images, you know, but I was often writing to images like this. So it was, you know, very enjoyable on the ones that you're just taking on a photo and working with it. But also with the ones that were on some oblique fit or oblique match. I didn't do too much changing, but here and there a little bit, you know. But I like that. I like that torque, right? There's a torque to it where this doesn't really mean that, or this doesn't really mean this, but they all do mean this. Whatever the mystery, I guess. And it's something about how meaning resonates, and can give a feeling of tenderness in loss, for example. You know, or and my family's gone through so much, and I know what yours has too. Everybody's has. That this is very consoling, and I think that was the main thing. It was just so consoling to see these spaces, you know, that you know your person in your family that you lost walked through those spaces, or you walked through those spaces together, you know. And so I just felt great consolation.
While you were saying that, I was thinking of the poems that you're carving these words to create images in people's minds.
Yeah.
And I'm just forcing the images into their minds. So the combination of those two, you can kind of dance back and forth, like, okay, there's the image, and then you go and read your words, and that puts in another image.
Yeah.
And either they combine or they don't.
But it's funny how like opposite it is. I feel like the carving of words is forcing it into someone, and I feel like the images are like water just coming into you.
I see.
So
Where you can
it's-
interpret the
Yeah.
image,
Yeah,
where
it's
you're
kinda
forcing the
interesting.
word, the
Right,
image.
yeah. Work for each of us the
Yeah,
opposite
it's
direction.
the opposite of
Yeah.
each way. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, other thoughts or?
Sounds like the dynamic between the image and the words is a confirmation that there's the gesture the gesture that you're making in the book
Yes.
is a confirmation.
Yes.
And so I wonder if you thought about confounding the image and the word, or if that was part of this,
Yes, there is
any
that.
part of the
Yeah.
sensibility of the book.
Yeah, definitely. And when you said that, I was thinking of Levinas and the face and the encounter, basically, you know. And there's so much to an encounter that is totally ineffable, you know. So it's often trying to play with exactly or mess with exactly what you're saying. You know, that there's not an absolute, there's not a black and white, and there's all this confluence, you know, to the encounter of the face of the earth or the face of the sky or the face of another. You know? And so yeah, that's a great observation on your part of just, that was maybe most of it. Seeing these things and then what to do with them, you know. It's not like you can own them or claim them or something, you know. Yeah.
Were there images and words that you struggled with?
Yeah, absolutely. There were definitely a lot of images that I struggled with, whether they would stay or go, you know, in the editing process, and the layout of the flow of the book got changed many times. Especially once I had the words in, then there was a bit more of a narrative to it, even though there's not a narrative, which
Right. It's a very oblique narrative,
Yes,
but it
it's-
is a narrative. yeah.
correct. And so there was a lot of wrestling that was done. But for the most part, once the words were with the image, that stayed, and then the flow kind of changed slightly to fit. But it was gut-wrenching at times.
So you
But
did the book design yourself?
I did the layout, a good portion of the layout myself, and then a friend who's a graphic designer arranged the words better because I had them where they were too much or too little. And so we got that standardized and placing them in the image turned out actually to be one of the harder spots,
Yeah.
things to do, because I didn't want it to mess with the composition, but I wanted to complement it as well, so that was a bit tricky. But those are all details that you think are important, but they're not, but they are at the same time, so it messed you up after a while. But I was thinking while we were talking earlier also that a good portion of this was done in 2020, and I'm curious, there must be we're going to see now and over the next few years, just the massive amount of art that was created and writers that actually got to the time to write their book, or people that actually had to, because I hear constantly of, well, I didn't have anything to do, and it was perfect time to get my book done, or it was a perfect time, and this was another one of those as well. Like, I've got some time on my hands. Now's the time. I've been pushing this off, pushing it off.
Yeah.
Let's get it done now. And by now, I mean, it was still 2 years, you know, it was a process, but you could at least turn everything off and focus a little bit.
Totally. And I would say, in answer to that, you know, it's very disturbing at times because I was overwhelmed by the beauty almost all the time, you know, and I don't know what to do with that part. Like, I feel like going to sleep. Happily, not badly, like just kind of like, there's just so much beauty there. I don't know that we should put any words on it, you know. So it was always a little bit disturbing, but I think something that helped me, I was also during that time, we had all the time in the world for a while there. I'd watched all of Terrence Malick's films. They're almost all filmed in the golden hour. They're almost always and especially when he goes into that phase where it's almost nothing but inner monologues for like 5 movies, you know. This felt a lot like that, like it's all the golden hour, and what do you do to the golden hour? Not much. It's its own thing. You shouldn't do anything to it but receive it, you know. So there was a lot of that kind of disturbing, like I should be just receiving this and not putting anything on it. So
And many of them also, you know, there's tried to balance a little bit of where I also like doing documentation of places. So
Yeah,
just a
very
simple
cool.
shot of a town, like Winnet, where I just want to document that place in time.
Look at that.
As opposed to, I want good light and I want good composition, but for the most part, I just want it to be a documentary
Yeah.
shot, especially in areas that are changing so quickly. I have photos now that I thought, I just took 10 years ago that I thought would last forever, and they're all completely, houses now in many spots.
Now take, for this one, for example,
Completely what?
would you,
Houses, all housing now, whereas
Oh.
not just 10 years ago, it was nothing but farmer ranch land.
and it's all houses?
Gallatin Valley, of course,
Yeah.
Flathead Valley, places where there's
Yeah,
even in
exactly.
Missoula in some places. But I find that who knows what some of these central places, Lewistown, and Great Falls, places like that, who knows what that's going to look like in 10 years? Hopefully, very similar to what it.
I mean, who knows what Coahuil's gonna look like? That's gonna be a metropolis.
Yeah, it'll double in size.
Double, that thing doubled in 20
Double or
years.
triple in size.
It actually cut in half in 20 years.
Yeah.
But, so in this composition, tell us, for the naked eye, we can see that there's a road going to the, kind of horizon point, but then you've got the fields way out there, so, which are in perfect composition. So, in any case, what do you think of when you're sort of framing this and you're looking, and do you think of nothing? Do you think of, I want this to be the centerpiece, or,
Yes and no. A lot of it is done unconsciously.
Yeah.
It's a feeling of unease when it's not right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that can be done in the actual shooting process. A lot of it is done in the actual processing, where I can crop it to what I was actually trying, the angle and the composition that I was trying to get in symmetry that I want, all those sort of things. So it's a combination of the two. But there is a conscious thought, but I think most of it is not conscious.
And so this set piece off to the side, is that ridge way back there?
It is.
And then, was that a separate photo, or is that?
It's a separate photo, yeah. In some cases, I wanted to have just some sort of detail, like, I would spend several days here taking photos, but in trying to show for the book, I have one page to show.
Right.
And a lot of times just the panoramic will show enough, but in some cases I wanted to throw a detail in,
That's neat.
or something else to give a little bit more of the story, and that's similar here. And in some cases, like Lewistown, or some of these other that had just a few more details, just to give a little bit more of the story than just the single composition.
From the snapshot you've shared, it feels a very affirming book, which is something that I think is really needed now.
Appreciate it. It felt that way putting it together to me.
Yes.
Very fulfilling.
Yes, in the end, and it's all starting,
Yeah.
honestly, it's starting to feel a bit more that way. When you spend so much time on something like this and then have it in the final form, and then you've got it, and you start to get it distributed, and then it takes time to just not look at it and not think about it, and then come back to it and like, all right, we did that.
Very refreshing.
Yeah, it's refreshing, and it feels, it's starting to feel that way now.
This is a good place to close, because again, Craig has such an eye, for light, beauty, depth, gravity, right? So if you don't mind, open the name of it and show the
Sure.
buffalo's mouth here.
This was just a bit of luck, and this is on the American Prairie Foundation, where they're bringing the bison back in, and I was outstanding in the middle here, and this guy just decided to give a nice big yawn.
Bison yawn.
He was very, very bored with my presence.
I love it. So you do see this like expansive photo, and then it took me, I was looking, wow, that's really gorgeous.
So
And I look at the title, I'm like, so yawning in the corner.
Titling is not easy. With these photos, it's just for this photo alone, these guys are standing like right there. And so I'm taking this photo and then panning across like this. So I'm right in the middle of this whole herd.
Are you seated, or are you?
In this case, I'm kneeling down. I'm just standing there quietly, so they don't, make a.
And this
mess
one
of
was
me.
written for this one too.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, sorry. So yeah, I think we can end with that one,
That's
unless
great.
there are any other questions.
That's good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
We'll be signing if you're interested.
So
Be
gorgeous
out there
book,
at the table.
very healing.
Yeah. It's been a good one. Thanks a lot.